An arrogant man in full camouflage just stormed into a veterinary clinic, violently yanking a terrified dog and screaming about his classified combat missions. He bullied the receptionist and even shoved a crying woman aside, completely convinced he was the toughest and most dangerous guy in the room. But he made one massive, fatal mistake. He picked a fight with the quiet guy reading a book in the corner. He had absolutely no idea that Silent Stranger was an active-duty Navy SEAL. And the moment the SEAL stood up, this loud bully's world was about to be completely shattered. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from. And if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The fluorescent tubes hummed above the waiting room of the Oak Creek Veterinary Clinic. The air smelled of industrial bleach mixed with the sharp scent of wet fur and animal anxiety. Tuesday mornings always brought a heavy crowd. Dogs panted in the tight space. Cats hissed from the dark corners of plastic travel carriers. A nervous golden retriever paced in tight circles, repeatedly wrapping its leash around the legs of an elderly man who muttered soft apologies to the room. Sarah, a young receptionist with a tight blonde ponytail and wrinkled blue scrubs, typed frantically behind a tall wooden counter. Office phones rang without pause. A printer ground out receipts. It was a normal scene of civilian chaos. In the far corner, completely detached from the noise, sat Nolan. He was 32 years old. His dark hair was buzzed close to his scalp. He wore a faded grey t-shirt that stretched over a dense, muscular frame, dark denim jeans, and scuffed brown work boots. He held a worn paperback book in his calloused hands, his pale blue eyes tracking the lines of text. He did not look up when a small terrier snapped and barked at a passing veterinary technician. He did not flinch when a metal surgical tray dropped heavily onto the floor somewhere down the hallway. He breathed in a slow, measured rhythm. He sat with his back to the wall, positioned exactly where he could see both the main entrance and the hallway leading to the examination rooms. It was a survival habit he could never turn off. Beside his left leg sat Ranger. Ranger was a 4-year-old German shepherd. He had a thick coat of jet black and rich mahogany tan. His amber eyes tracked the chaotic movements in the room, processing every passing shadow and sudden sound. However, his body remained entirely still. He sat in a perfect upright posture. His tail rested flat against the cold linoleum floor. He did not pant. He did not whine. He looked less like a standard pet and more like a coiled spring, holding a massive amount of physical energy under absolute mental control. Nolan did not hold a leash. A simple flat leather collar rested around Ranger's neck. A small hand signal from Nolan kept the dog locked in a strict command. They were only there for a routine vaccination checkup. They had nowhere else to be. Nolan enjoyed these rare moments of stillness. After 10 years of active duty in the Navy SEAL teams, surrounded by the deafening noise of rotor blades, ocean waves, and gunfire, the chaotic waiting room of a suburban clinic felt remarkably peaceful to him. A woman sitting 2 chairs away struggled to hold a hyperactive beagle. She wiped sweat from her forehead, looked at Nolan, and then looked at Ranger. She offered a tired, polite smile. She asked him how he trained his dog to be so incredibly well-behaved. Nolan closed his book. He kept his answer short and polite. He told her it just took a lot of patience and consistency. He did not mention the hundreds of hours of tactical training, the night helicopter insertions, or the explosive detection drills they ran overseas. He preferred to blend in. He liked being a ghost in plain clothes. Ranger turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Nolan. Nolan gave a barely visible nod. Ranger relaxed his jaw, but maintained his rigid seated position. The clinic door chimed as people came and went. The rhythm of the morning flowed predictably. Sarah called names over the intercom. Owners gathered their pets and walked down the brightly lit hallways. The tension in the room remained low. It was just another mundane Tuesday morning in the suburbs. Then the heavy glass front door flew open. It did not just open normally, Someone shoved it hard enough to make the metal hinges scream. The thick glass slammed against the rubber doorstop with a violent crack. The sudden noise made every animal in the room jump in panic. The golden retriever scrambled backward, nearly knocking over the elderly man. Cats yowled loudly inside their cages. The woman with the beagle let out a startled gasp. Nolan did not jump. His breathing did not change. His eyes simply shifted from his resting position to the brightly lit entryway. A man stomped into the clinic. He looked to be in his mid-40s. He wore a pristine woodland camouflage jacket over a tight black shirt. Large, mirrored aviator sunglasses covered half his face, completely unnecessary under the dim indoor lights. His black combat boots were spotless, lacking a single speck of mud, dust, or wear. His chest puffed out aggressively as he surveyed the room, clearly expecting everyone to stop and look at him. He held a thick nylon leash in his right hand. He wrapped the leash tightly around his wrist, displaying a complete lack of proper handling technique. He pulled it hard. A Belgian Malinois skidded through the doorway. The dog was young, thin, and visibly terrified. Its fawn coat looked dull. Its tail tucked tightly between its hind legs, its ears pinned flat against its narrow skull. The dog wore a heavy tactical harness covered in meaningless military morale patches. The tactical collar around its neck was improperly fitted. It sat too low on the throat, restricting the dog's breathing every time the man yanked the leash. The man pulled the leash again, forcing the Malinois to stumble forward across the slippery floor. The dog scrambled to find its footing, panting heavily from stress. It did not scan the room for threats like a working dog. It looked around frantically for an escape route. The man marched directly toward the reception desk, completely ignoring the line of waiting people. He slammed his fist down on the wooden counter, causing Sarah to jump back in her chair. He demanded immediate service. He announced to the entire room in a booming, arrogant voice that he was a special operations combat veteran on a tight schedule. He claimed his high-value military asset needed to see a doctor right now, regardless of who was next on the list. Sarah stammered, trying to explain the triage protocol, but the man talked over her, his voice echoing off the walls. The quiet peace of the clinic shattered instantly. The air grew thick with tension. People shifted uncomfortably in their plastic chairs, avoiding eye contact with the loud intruder. In the corner, Ranger let out a very low, almost inaudible breath through his nose. His ears swiveled forward, locking onto the chaotic energy radiating from the man at the desk. Nolan set his paperback book down on the empty chair beside him. He crossed his arms over his broad chest. He leaned back against the wall and watched the loud stranger. The silence of the soldier had met the noise of an intruder. Marcus slammed his heavy hand against the wooden counter. The loud smack echoed off the tiled walls like a gunshot. Sarah dropped her pen. It rolled off the desk and clattered onto the floor. She pushed her chair back, creating distance between herself and the furious man. "I do not have time to wait in line with house pets," Marcus announced. His voice filled the small clinic. He puffed out his chest, making the woodland camouflage pattern of his jacket stretch tight across his shoulders. He pointed a thick finger at the young receptionist. "I just got back from a classified deployment overseas. This animal right here is a high-value tactical asset. He needs a full medical clearance right now. Move us to the front of the line." Sarah swallowed hard. Her hands shook as she hovered over her keyboard. She looked at the computer screen, then looked back at Marcus. "Sir, I understand your urgency, but we operate on a strict triage system. Unless your dog is experiencing a life-threatening emergency, you have to wait for the doctor to finish with the current patients. We have 3 critical cases in the back." Marcus scoffed. He gripped the thick nylon leash tightly in his right fist. He yanked it upward with unnecessary force. The Belgian Malinois choked. The dog scrambled backward on the slippery linoleum, its back legs shaking violently. It tucked its tail completely under its belly. The dog looked terrified. It did not look like a seasoned warrior. It looked like a victim. Triage? Marcus laughed loudly. This dog clears buildings. He finds explosives in combat zones. You think your schedule matters to a special operator? Get the doctor out here before I report this facility to my commanding officer. The other customers in the room shifted away from the counter. A heavy, uncomfortable silence settled over the waiting chairs. Mrs. Higgins, an older woman with thin grey hair, sat near the front. She wore a knitted pink cardigan and clutched a green plastic cat carrier tightly on her lap. She looked down at the floor, actively avoiding Marcus's aggressive gaze. A younger man sitting near the window pulled his golden retriever closer to his legs. Nobody spoke. Nobody wanted to confront the angry man in camouflage. Fear dictated the atmosphere of the room. People hoped he would just get what he wanted and leave. Nolan watched the entire scene unfold from his dark corner. He did not move a single muscle. His body remained perfectly relaxed against the wall. He evaluated the situation with clinical precision. He processed every detail. A real military operator does not broadcast his status to a room full of civilians. A real operator does not demand special treatment at a suburban veterinary clinic. Nolan looked at Marcus's hands. They appeared soft. They lacked the heavy calluses built from years of handling weapons and ropes. He looked at Marcus's posture. The man stood off balance, putting his weight awkwardly on his heels instead of the balls of his feet. He possessed zero spatial awareness. He focused his entire existence on bullying a frightened young receptionist. Nolan then shifted his gaze to the Belgian Malinois. A working dog shares a profound, unspoken bond with its handler. A true bond relies on mutual trust, respect, and silent communication. This Malinois showed zero trust. It showed pure fear. The tactical equipment sat incorrectly on its thin frame. The heavy harness restricted its natural shoulder movement. The collar pinched its neck. The leash tension never slacked. Marcus used the leash exclusively as a tool of punishment, never as a line of communication. The dog flinched every time Marcus raised his voice. Nolan felt a familiar coldness settle deep in his chest. He hated bullies. He despised cowards who used animals to boost their own fragile egos. Ranger sat perfectly still next to Nolan's left leg. However, the German Shepherd picked up on the subtle shift in his handler's internal state. Ranger's amber eyes locked onto Marcus. The dog did not break his sit command. He did not move his paws. He just watched the loud man with intense focus. Marcus grew increasingly agitated at the front desk. Sarah picked up the office phone to call the clinic manager for help. Marcus reached out across the counter and slammed the receiver down hard, cutting off the dial tone. "Do not ignore me," he shouted. He stepped back from the desk, throwing his arms up in dramatic frustration. He spun around to face the waiting room, actively seeking an audience for his anger. He wanted everyone to see how important he was. As he spun, his heavy black combat boot swung wide. His foot caught the metal leg of a blue plastic waiting chair. He kicked the chair violently. The chair skidded across the linoleum floor with a sharp screech. It crashed directly into the legs of Mrs. Higgins. The old woman gasped in pain. The green plastic cat carrier tilted sideways off her lap. The cat inside screeched in terror. Mrs. Higgins fumbled frantically to catch the carrier before it hit the hard ground. She managed to grab the plastic handle, but her hands shook terribly. She clutched the carrier to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. Marcus did not apologize. He glared at the frail old woman as if she had deliberately placed the chair there to annoy him. He took a step toward her. He opened his mouth to yell another insult. He never got the chance. A sound erupted from the corner of the room. It started deep within a massive chest. It rolled up through a thick throat. It was not a bark. It was a low, vibrating growl. It sounded like a heavy engine starting in the dark. It held absolute authority and delivered a crystal-clear warning. Ranger remained perfectly seated. His lips barely curled to expose the base of his white teeth. But the sound he produced filled every single corner of the veterinary clinic. The deep frequency of the growl actually vibrated in the floorboards. It was the sound of a true apex predator drawing an absolute line in the sand. The entire room froze instantly. The golden retriever stopped panting. The cat stopped screeching. Every pair of human eyes snapped toward the dark corner. Marcus jumped backward. He tripped over his own stiff boots and stumbled awkwardly. He flailed his arms. He yanked the Malinois' leash by accident, pulling the poor dog hard into his own legs. Marcus threw his hands out to steady himself against the reception desk. All the angry color completely drained from his face. His aviator sunglasses slid crookedly down his nose. He stared wide-eyed at the massive black and tan German shepherd sitting completely still against the wall. Ranger stopped growling. He simply stared at Marcus. The dog did not blink. The message had been successfully delivered. Nolan did not speak. He did not command the dog to quiet down. He let the heavy silence stretch across the room. He kept his arms crossed over his chest. He met Marcus's panicked gaze with cold, empty blue eyes. In that brief, silent exchange, Nolan established total dominance over the room. The loud intruder had been entirely stopped by a single sound. Marcus fixed his crooked sunglasses and cleared his throat. He tried to stand tall again after stumbling away from the dark corner. He let out a loud, forced laugh that completely lacked any real humor. "A bit jumpy today," he announced to the room. He ignored the old woman he had just terrified. He turned his back to Nolan and faced the center of the clinic. He desperately wanted to regain control of the situation. He decided to play the hero card. He puffed out his chest and flashed a bright, artificial smile at the nervous customers sitting in the plastic chairs. "You have to excuse my intensity," Marcus said in a booming voice. He paced back and forth across the linoleum floor. When you spend 10 months in the sandbox doing high-speed operations, you forget how to act in a normal suburban town. My dog and I just got off a C-17 transport plane a few days ago. We are still running on pure adrenaline. We have been kicking indoors and taking down bad guys. It takes a while to turn that switch off. The waiting room remained dead silent. A few people nodded politely, just to avoid making him angry again. The young man by the window stared at his phone. Sarah sat frozen behind the reception desk. Marcus took their silence as an invitation to keep talking. He leaned against an empty chair and tugged the terrified Malinois closer to his heavy boots. "People back home do not understand the sacrifices," Marcus continued. His voice dripped with fake, rehearsed emotion. He sounded like he was reading a script. "We cleared deep underground bunkers. We took down high-value targets in the middle of the night. My boy here saved my squad 3 times in Fallujah. He took shrapnel for me. That is exactly why I started the Freedom K9 Rescue Fund. I raise money to help real warrior dogs get the medical care the government refuses to provide." Marcus reached into his camouflage jacket. He pulled out a stack of cheap, glossy business cards. He walked over to the front desk and dropped the stack loudly onto the wooden counter. He ordered Sarah to hand them out to every customer. He claimed he was trying to raise $50,000 by the end of the month. He looked around the room, actively trying to make eye contact with people, hoping someone would pull out a wallet and offer a cash donation. Nobody moved. From his quiet corner, Nolan analyzed every single word. He broke Marcus down into raw data points. The entire story was a pathetic fabrication. The Battle of Fallujah happened many years ago. The timeline made absolutely zero sense, considering the young age of the Malinois standing there. Nolan shifted his analytical gaze to Marcus's tactical gear. The boots were the first obvious giveaway. They were cheap, shiny black jungle boots with side zippers. Real military operators stopped wearing those decades ago. They offered zero ankle support for carrying heavy combat loads. A real soldier would break his ankle wearing those in rough terrain. Nolan moved his eyes up the man's body. He studied the patches glued to Marcus's jacket. Marcus wore a ranger scroll on his right shoulder and an airborne tab on his left arm. However, he wore a shiny Navy rank insignia pinned right on his collar. The combination was literally impossible. It looked like the man had purchased a handful of random patches from an online surplus store and stuck them wherever he thought they looked cool. Furthermore, Marcus used words like sandbox and high speed, exactly the way actors used them in cheap Hollywood action movies. Real special operations soldiers rarely spoke like that in public. They spoke quietly. They used precise, boring acronyms. They went out of their way to avoid drawing attention to themselves. Marcus also wore mirrored aviator sunglasses indoors. Real operators wore ballistic rated eye protection, and they always took them off when entering a dark building to maintain maximum visual clarity. The man was a walking billboard of lies. The final piece of proof was the dog. Ranger sat perfectly still beside Nolan. The massive German shepherd projected calm, disciplined power. Ranger looked directly at the Malinois. The Malinois looked back. The young fawn-colored dog stood with its weight shifted entirely to its back legs. It was ready to bolt at any second. The dog panted rapidly, which was a clear sign of severe mental distress, not physical exhaustion. The tactical vest on the Malinois was brand new. The stiff nylon had no dirt on it. The metal buckles did not have a single scratch. A real working vest gets worn down and scuffed within a week of actual deployment. Ranger smelled the sharp scent of fear pouring off the Malinois. A well-trained German shepherd possesses highly tuned emotional intelligence. Ranger knew the Malinois was not an aggressive threat. Ranger knew the Malinois was a prisoner. The young dog whimpered very softly. Marcus jerked the leash hard to silence the animal. "Lock it down, soldier," Marcus commanded the dog, using a deep theatrical voice. "Stay frosty." Nolan let out a very soft breath. It was almost a sigh of disgust. The sound was barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights, but Marcus heard it. Marcus stopped his fake charity pitch. He turned his head sharply. He looked past the rows of waiting customers. He locked his hidden eyes with Nolan. Marcus immediately felt the sting of Nolan's quiet judgment. The muscular man sitting in the corner did not look impressed by the war stories. He did not look scared of the camouflage jacket. He just looked completely bored. That bored, empty look completely shattered Marcus's fragile ego. Marcus needed every single person in the room to worship him. He needed them to believe his fantasy. He decided right then to make a brutal example out of the quiet guy reading the paperback book. Marcus walked deliberately across the room. His heavy boots clumped loudly on the tile floor, creating an intimidating rhythm. He dragged the slipping, choking Malinois behind him without looking back at the dog. He stopped exactly 3 feet away from Nolan. Marcus looked down at Nolan's faded gray t-shirt. He looked at Nolan's scuffed brown work boots and plain denim jeans. A nasty, superior smirk formed on his face. "You got a problem, buddy?" Marcus asked aggressively. He crossed his arms over his chest, trying to make his shoulders look wider. Nolan did not stand up. He kept his back resting comfortably against the wall. He looked up at Marcus with flat, perfectly calm, blue eyes. "No problem," Nolan said. His voice was quiet, deep, and completely steady. Marcus scoffed loudly. He gestured a thick hand toward Nolan's plain clothes. "You sit over here rolling your eyes at me. You probably work at a gas station. You sit in your safe little air-conditioned town while real men go out into the dirt and do the hard work. You have absolutely no idea what real stress looks like. You have no right to judge a combat veteran." Nolan did not react to the direct insult. His face remained a completely blank slate. He simply shifted his eyes down to look at the Malinois. He noticed the raw, bright red skin visible under the heavy tactical collar. The sight of the physical abuse made his stomach tighten with cold anger. but he did not let a single emotion show on his face. Marcus noticed Nolan looking at the dogs. Marcus pointed a thick, angry finger directly at Ranger. "And look at this thing," Marcus sneered, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. "What exactly is that? A civilian mutt? A cute little house pet for you to play fetch with in the park?" Ranger did not blink. He kept his amber eyes fixed dead center on Marcus's chest. He did not growl this time. He just waited with coiled energy for a command from Nolan. "My dog is a lethal military weapon," Marcus bragged loudly, making sure Sarah and everyone else at the front desk could hear him clearly. He yanked the Malinois forward again. The frightened dog gagged softly. "My dog eats gunpowder for breakfast. He has a confirmed kill count in 2 different countries. Your dog is just a useless fat mutt taking up space in my clinic. He would not last 5 seconds in a real fight. You should put him outside before he wets himself in front of a real warrior." The entire room went completely silent again. Sarah stopped typing at her keyboard. Mrs. Higgins held her breath, clutching her cat carrier. Everyone waited for the quiet, muscular man in the corner to finally explode. Everyone expected a violent fight to break out right there in the waiting area. Nolan did not explode. He did not raise his voice. He uncrossed his arms and leaned forward slightly. The trap was perfectly set. The clinic held its breath. Everyone expected a shouting match or a physical brawl. Instead, Nolan let out a soft, genuine chuckle. The sound completely threw Marcus off balance. Nolan did not stand up. He rested his forearms on his knees and looked up at the angry man with an expression of mild curiosity. "A confirmed kill count," Nolan repeated quietly. "That sounds incredibly intense. You must have seen a lot of heavy action over there." Marcus puffed out his chest even further, mistaking Nolan's calm tone for submission and awe. He needed this validation to fuel his fantasy. "More than you will ever read about in your little paperback books," Marcus bragged. He adjusted his grip on the leash, forcing the Malinois to sit awkwardly on the slick floor. The dog's claws clicked desperately, trying to find traction. "We did the jobs the regular army was too scared to take. Black operations. Off the books. We went behind enemy lines with 0 support." Nolan nodded slowly. He tilted his head like a student listening to a seasoned professor. "I imagine that requires a lot of specialized gear," Nolan said. He pointed a casual finger at Marcus's jacket. "You have a ranger scroll and an airborne tab, but you wear Navy rank on your collar. That is a very unique combination. Joint task force." Marcus did not miss a beat. He swallowed the bait instantly. "Exactly," Marcus stated loudly, projecting his voice for the entire room to hear. "Classified Joint Strike Team. They pulled the best of the best from every branch. We operated outside the standard chain of command. We wrote our own rules." While Marcus spun his web of lies, Ranger kept his amber eyes fixed on the trembling Belgian Malinois. The German shepherd did not care about the loud human. He focused entirely on the animal. Ranger processed the scent of sour sweat and old urine clinging to the Malinois' coat. He watched the rapid, shallow breathing. He saw the way the young dog kept its head lowered, avoiding all direct eye contact. This was a universal sign of submission and terror. Ranger noticed a thick, raw line of missing fur around the Malinois' neck, situated just above the heavy tactical collar. A thin wire choke chain sat buried deep in the skin, hidden beneath the thick nylon. The metal bit viciously into the animal's throat every time Marcus jerked his hand. Ranger understood immediately. The Malinois was not a trained weapon. It possessed no combat drive. It was a broken prisoner trapped in a cycle of pain. Ranger let out a very soft whine. It was a sound of deep, instinctual empathy. The Malinois flicked its ears toward Ranger, acknowledging the safe presence of the larger dog. The two animals shared a silent conversation across the linoleum, entirely unnoticed by the arrogant man holding the leash. Nolan heard Ranger whine. He knew exactly what his partner saw. The cold anger in Nolan's chest solidified into absolute ice, but his face remained a mask of polite interest. He needed to lock Marcus into a corner from which the man could never escape. He needed to expose the fraud completely before taking any physical action. "A classified joint strike team," Nolan echoed softly. He rubbed his chin as if pondering a deep thought. "That makes total sense. I watch a lot of military documentaries. I read about some of those operations." Nolan stood up slowly. He moved with deliberate, fluid grace. He did not step into Marcus's personal space, but he leveled his posture so they stood eye to eye. "You mentioned you just got back from the sandbox," Nolan said. "They must have stationed you out at Camp Kilo, the big forward operating base near the border. I hear the logistics out there are a nightmare during the rainy season." Marcus nodded enthusiastically, eager to confirm his fake veteran status. "Oh yeah, Camp Kilo. Nasty place. Sand gets into everything. The chow hall was a nightmare. We ran most of our night raids out of there." Nolan offered a small, appreciative smile. "I heard the dust storms there are brutal," Nolan added. "But if you ran deep black operations, you probably did not stay at the main base very often. They usually push the Tier 1 guys out to the remote outposts to keep them off the radar. Did they send your squad out to Firebase Tarek?" Marcus's eyes darted left and right for a fraction of a second. He processed the unfamiliar name. His ego refused to let him admit ignorance in front of the silent clinic. He needed to maintain his position as the ultimate authority in the room. "Firebase Tarek," Marcus confirmed loudly. He pointed a finger at Nolan as if praising a good student. "You know your stuff." "Yes. We spent 3 months at Tarek. We slept in mud huts. We ate scorpions to survive. That place tested every ounce of my tactical training. We held the line against 200 insurgents out there. Just me, my dog, and my squad. We held the perimeter for 48 hours straight without any sleep or reinforcements." The small, polite smile vanished entirely from Nolan's face. The shift happened instantly. The mild curiosity died. A heavy, suffocating gravity replaced it. Nolan's blue eyes turned flat and dangerous, resembling the surface of a frozen ocean. The air around him seemed to drop in temperature. Marcus stopped talking. His survival instinct finally registered the sudden change in the atmosphere. He took a half-step backward, his combat boots squeaking awkwardly on the floor. "Firebase Tarek does not exist," Nolan said. His voice was no longer a polite question. It was a heavy, blunt instrument. "I made it up 10 seconds ago. Camp Kilo was decommissioned and completely bulldozed 5 years ago. Nobody runs night raids out of a parking lot." Marcus froze. His jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The loud, arrogant operator suddenly looked like a terrified child caught in a lie. Nolan took one slow, deliberate step forward. He did not raise his hands. He did not threaten Marcus with physical violence. He simply projected the overwhelming, undeniable presence of a man who actually knew the smell of war. "You did not serve on a classified joint strike team," Nolan stated clearly, ensuring every person in the waiting room heard the truth. "You bought those patches online. You laced your boots wrong. And you are torturing a terrified animal to make yourself feel important." Marcus turned bright red. Panic and rage flooded his face. He gripped the leash tighter, preparing to explode. Marcus stood completely frozen. His face shifted rapidly from pale shock to a deep, angry crimson. His jaw muscles twitched uncontrollably. He tightened his grip on the nylon leash, preparing to shout a barrage of loud excuses or violent threats. He opened his mouth to scream at Nolan, A loud, desperate shriek ripped through the clinic, shattering the tense standoff instantly. The heavy glass front door burst open for the second time that morning, slamming against the wall with terrifying force. A young woman stumbled blindly into the waiting room. She was in her early 30s, wearing a light grey sweatshirt that was now entirely soaked in thick, dark blood. Tears streamed down her panicked, pale face. She clutched a small, limp Jack Russell Terrier tightly to her chest. The little dog breathed in shallow, ragged gasps, its eyes rolled back in shock. A careless driver had struck the animal just outside the busy shopping centre. Bright red blood dripped steadily from the dog's mouth onto the clean linoleum floor, leaving a horrific trail. The woman screamed for help, her voice cracking with absolute terror. The mundane quiet of the suburban veterinary clinic vanished completely, replaced by the raw, chaotic reality of a true medical emergency. The door behind the wooden reception desk slammed open. "Doctor!" Thomas Aris sprinted out into the main lobby. He was a tall, lean veterinarian in his late 50s with thinning grey hair, kind eyes, and a crisp white lab coat. He took one single look at the bleeding terrier and instantly shifted into professional crisis mode. He ordered Sarah to grab the trauma kit and prep the main surgical suite immediately. He instructed the crying woman to follow him straight down the main hallway to the emergency treatment room. The other customers in the waiting area scrambled frantically out of the way. Mrs. Higgins pulled her plastic cat carrier tight against her chest and pressed herself deep into the corner, praying for the little dog. The young man by the window grabbed his golden retriever by the collar and moved quickly behind a row of blue plastic chairs. Everyone recognized the severe gravity of the situation. Everyone cleared the path to save a life. Everyone except Marcus. Marcus saw his entire fabricated reality slipping away right before his eyes. Nolan had completely humiliated him in front of a captive audience. Now, this sudden, bloody emergency stole all the remaining attention in the room. His fragile, inflated ego simply could not handle being pushed aside and ignored. He desperately needed to assert his dominance. He needed to prove he was still the most important person in the building. As Dr. Aris and the crying woman rushed toward the narrow hallway entrance, Marcus took a deliberate step directly into their path. He planted his heavy black boots wide on the slippery tile floor. He thrust his chest forward and held up a thick hand like a traffic cop halting a parade. He physically blocked the entryway, stopping the panicked veterinarian and the dying dog dead in their tracks. Marcus aggressively demanded they treat his military working dog first. He claimed his Malinois suffered from severe combat-induced trauma and a scratch on its paw that required immediate tactical triage. He shouted loudly that civilian house pets held absolutely zero priority over a federal special operations asset. Dr. Aris stared at the man in total, unblinking disbelief. The experienced veterinarian begged Marcus to step aside, explaining rapidly that the tiny terrier had a punctured lung and would die in a matter of minutes without oxygen and emergency surgery. The crying woman sobbed hysterically, pleading with Marcus to please let them pass. She tried to slip past his broad shoulders, desperate to save her best friend. Marcus shoved her back. He actually raised his large hand and forcefully pushed a frantic, blood-soaked woman away from the hallway entrance. He barked a harsh order, telling her to stand down and respect a decorated combat veteran. He yanked the Malinois' leash incredibly hard to emphasize his point, forcing the terrified young dog to yelp loudly in pain. The crowd in the waiting room gasped in collective horror. Sarah grabbed the desk phone to dial the local police. The tension in the room spiked into pure, volatile panic. Nolan moved. He did not shout a verbal warning. He did not assume a ridiculous fighting stance. He simply eliminated the physical distance between himself and Marcus in 3 explosive, perfectly calculated strides. He moved with the terrifying speed and kinetic efficiency of a man who spent 10 years surviving in the deadliest combat environments on Earth. He did not throw a punch. A punch creates unnecessary distance, risks broken knuckles, and introduces unpredictable variables into a confined space. Nolan needed immediate absolute control over the threat. He reached out with both muscular hands, just as Marcus turned his head to look at him. Nolan grabbed Marcus's right wrist and his right elbow simultaneously with an iron grip. He pivoted his hips forcefully, driving his own heavy body weight forward while violently twisting Marcus's arm upward and tightly behind the man's back. The mechanical leverage of the seal joint lock was entirely flawless. It exploited the natural anatomical limits of the human shoulder to devastating effect. Marcus let out a sharp, pathetic gasp of shock as his joints locked tight, sending blinding pain shooting through his nervous system. Nolan did not stop his forward momentum. He drove Marcus aggressively forward across the tiles. He slammed the fake soldier face first into the hard drywall of the hallway entrance. The heavy, violent thud of Marcus hitting the wall rattled the framed animal anatomical charts hanging nearby. Nolan pinned the man flat against the cold plaster, applying precise, agonizing upward pressure to the locked shoulder joint. If Marcus struggled even an inch, his own shoulder would forcefully snap out of its socket. The intense, unfamiliar pain forced Marcus to instantly open his hand and drop the thick nylon leash. He grunted loudly, his face squished awkwardly against the white wall, his shiny mirrored aviator sunglasses clattering uselessly to the floor and cracking a lens. Nolan held him entirely immobilized with minimal physical effort, his breathing remaining incredibly slow and perfectly steady. "With the path completely clear, Doctor." Aris grabbed the frantic woman by her shoulder and hurried her down the hallway toward the bright surgical suite. The heavy metal doors of the trauma room swung shut behind them, finally sealing away the sound of the crying woman and allowing the clinic to breathe. Nolan remained stationed in the hallway, pressing the fraudulent bully firmly against the wall without saying a single word. Ranger stepped forward out of his dark corner. The massive German shepherd walked calmly over to the dropped leash. He placed one heavy, dominant paw squarely on the nylon webbing, ensuring the trembling Malinois could not run away in a state of panic. The true operators had taken total control of the room, restoring order through silent, disciplined action. Marcus gasped for air against the cold drywall. His right shoulder burned with intense, unnatural heat under Nolan's iron grip. The loud, arrogant man now whimpered softly, completely immobilized by a technique he had never seen outside of action movies. Nolan held him there for 10 full seconds, ensuring the medical team had absolute clearance down the hallway. Once the heavy metal doors of the surgical suite clicked shut, Nolan released the pressure. He stepped back, allowing Marcus to slide away from the wall. Marcus stumbled awkwardly, clutching his right shoulder with his left hand. His face contorted with a mixture of physical pain and pure, unhinged rage. He spun around to face Nolan, his chest heaving. "You are dead," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with panic. He pointed a shaking finger at Nolan. "You just assaulted a decorated federal officer. I am calling my commanding officer. I am calling the local police. I will have you thrown in federal prison for the rest of your miserable life. You have no idea who you just touched." Marcus frantically patted down his camouflage jacket, searching for his phone. He wanted to look intimidating, but his hands trembled violently. Nolan did not flinch at the loud threats. He stood perfectly balanced in the center of the hallway. He reached into his own front pocket and pulled out his smartphone. He bypassed Marcus completely. Nolan dialed the local emergency dispatcher himself. He held the phone to his ear, his face entirely blank. "Yes, this is a civilian requesting police presence at the Oak Creek Veterinary Clinic." Nolan spoke into the receiver with a calm, measured voice. "We have an individual here impersonating a military officer, physically harassing customers, and creating a dangerous public disturbance. He also physically pushed a woman during a medical emergency. The situation is currently secure, but we need officers to take a report. Nolan provided the exact address, ended the call, and slid the phone back into his pocket. He looked at Marcus. They are on their way. You have about 5 minutes to figure out your next lie. Marcus panicked. He looked around the waiting room, desperately searching for any sympathetic face. The crowd stared back at him with absolute disgust. Mrs. Higgins held her cat carrier tight, glaring at him. Sarah, the receptionist, stood behind her desk, arms crossed, clearly relieved that Nolan had intervened. Even the young man by the window looked ready to jump in if Marcus tried to attack again. Marcus realized he had lost the crowd. He decided to double down on his fake persona. He stood up straighter, ignoring the throbbing pain in his shoulder. You think the cops will believe a street thug over a special operations veteran? Marcus shouted, trying to regain his booming voice. I shed blood for this country. I have top secret clearance. They will arrest you the second they walk through that door. Nolan slowly shook his head. He stepped into the middle of the waiting room, closing the distance between them just enough to force Marcus to look up. Nolan decided to dismantle the man entirely before the police arrived. Let us talk about your blood and your clearance, Nolan said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. Let us talk about how you hold a leash. Nolan pointed to the thick nylon strap still resting under Ranger's heavy paw. You wrap the leash tightly around your wrist. A real handler never wraps a leash around his hand. If your dog hits a dead sprint or gets caught on a moving vehicle, a wrapped leash will snap your wrist in half. A real handler uses a secure, quick release grip. You handle that animal like a civilian walking a poodle. Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes darting to his dropped leash. Nolan did not stop. He pointed a steady finger at Marcus's spotless black jungle boots. You claim you spent months in the desert clearing bunkers. Those boots are made for wet jungle environments. They have drainage vents on the sides. If you wore those in the sand, your feet would be shredded by friction blisters within 2 days. Not a single operator wears shiny leather side zip boots in a combat zone. Nolan took another slow step forward, systematically stripping away every layer of the man's disguise. You use words like stay frosty and lethal weapon because you learned military terminology from video games. Real professionals do not talk about confirmed kill counts in suburban veterinary clinics. Real professionals do not wear their rank on their collar while wearing a tactical jacket. You threw together a costume to bully people who do not know any better. You use the respect earned by real soldiers to feed your own pathetic ego. The silence in the clinic felt incredibly heavy. Every single person in the room hung onto Nolan's words. Marcus backed away, his chest deflating. The loud, arrogant persona completely shattered under the weight of undeniable facts. However, a cornered liar always tries one last, desperate attack. Marcus bared his teeth, attempting to look tough. You talk a big game for a civilian, Marcus spat, his voice dropping into a nasty sneer. You read a few books and think you know how the military works. You have no right to question my service. You have never done anything brave in your entire life. Who the hell do you think you are to judge me? Nolan stopped moving. He stood completely still under the harsh fluorescent lights. He did not boast. He did not raise his voice. He simply reached over with his right hand and grabbed the edge of his left shirt sleeve. With a smooth, deliberate motion, Nolan pushed the fabric high up his thick bicep. He exposed the dark, intricate ink tattooed deeply into his skin. It was an eagle clutching a trident, an anchor, and a flintlock pistol. It was the special warfare insignia of the United States Navy SEALs. It was not a cheap patch bought online. It was a permanent mark earned through unimaginable physical suffering and absolute mental resilience. A collective gasp rippled through the waiting room. The young man by the window whispered a soft curse of pure shock. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand. Mrs. Higgins let out a small breath of awe. Everyone recognized the legendary symbol. Everyone instantly understood why the quiet man in the corner moved with such terrifying speed and perfect control. Marcus stared at the tattoo. All the blood instantly drained from his face, leaving his skin an ugly, pale gray. His jaw dropped open, but absolutely no sound came out. His knees physically buckled under him, forcing him to lean heavily against a plastic waiting chair to keep from collapsing onto the floor. The fake operator finally understood the fatal mistake he had made. He had spent his entire morning screaming about fake combat deployments, completely unaware that he was standing in the exact same room as a real, active, duty Tier 1 operator. The stolen mask had entirely fallen off, leaving nothing but a terrified, hollow shell of a man waiting for the police to arrive. Ranger sat calmly near the dropped leash, keeping the trembling Malinois completely safe. The massive German shepherd looked up at his handler. Nolan rolled his sleeve back down, covering the trident. He did not need the symbol to prove who he was. His actions had already spoken loud enough. He crossed his arms and waited patiently for the flashing red and blue lights to appear in the clinic windows. Red and blue lights flashed brightly through the wide glass windows of the clinic. The sweeping colors illuminated the frightened faces of the customers sitting in the plastic chairs. The heavy front door opened. 2 police officers stepped inside. Officer Davis was a tall, heavily built man with stern eyes and silver hair at his temples. His partner, Officer Miller, was younger, holding a yellow notepad ready for statements. Their heavy-duty leather belts clinked softly in the silent room. Marcus saw the uniforms and immediately shifted his survival strategy. He abandoned his aggressive posture. He dropped his shoulders, clutched his right arm tightly against his chest, and forced a look of pure agony onto his face. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Nolan. "Officers, arrest him right now!" Marcus shouted frantically, his voice cracking with fake terror. "That man attacked me unprovoked. I was just trying to get medical help for my dog. He grabbed me, slammed me into the drywall, and tried to steal my wallet. He is a violent criminal. I demand you press felony assault charges immediately." Officer Davis held up a large hand, signaling Marcus to stop shouting. The older officer possessed years of experience reading crime scenes. He looked around the clinic. He saw the overturned chair, the terrified customers huddled in the corners, and the thick nylon leash lying abandoned on the floor. Then he looked at Nolan. Nolan stood perfectly relaxed in the center of the room. He did not raise his hands defensively. He did not shout over Marcus to explain his side of the story. Nolan simply waited with the quiet confidence of a man who held the absolute truth. "Sir, take a breath and step back," Officer Davis instructed Marcus. He pulled out his own notepad. "We will get statements from everyone here. Nobody is leaving until we sort this out." While Marcus continued to whisper dramatic complaints to Officer Miller, a very subtle movement occurred near the reception desk. Ranger stepped away from Nolan's side. The massive German shepherd walked slowly and deliberately toward the trembling Belgian Malinois. The young Malinois cowered instantly, expecting a violent correction or an attack. The fawn-colored dog tucked its tail tightly under its belly and lowered its head to the linoleum floor. Ranger did not show a single sign of aggression. He lowered his large head and offered a deep, calming sniff. He used his dominant physical presence to create a safe barrier around the smaller dog. The Malinois stopped shaking quite so violently. Then, Ranger executed a highly specific action. He lifted his heavy black nose and firmly nudged a tiny, precise spot right behind the Malinois' left ear. He pushed his nose against the fur twice. He stopped, sat down right beside the terrified dog, and looked directly up at Nolan. Nolan recognized the silent signal instantly. A highly trained canine like Ranger possessed an incredibly sharp olfactory system. Ranger could easily detect the faint, unnatural scent of an embedded electronic microchip, or perhaps the tiny ridge of scar tissue left behind by a veterinary injection needle. Nolan stepped forward, cutting off Marcus's ongoing complaints to the police. "Officer Davis," Nolan spoke clearly, drawing the attention of the entire room. "Before anyone takes another statement, I need to ask the receptionist a question." Nolan looked at Sarah behind the wooden desk. "Do you have a universal microchip scanner available?" Sarah nodded quickly, eager to help. She reached under the counter and pulled out a small, yellow plastic scanning device. Dr. Aris walked out of the surgical suite hallway at that exact moment. He looked exhausted but visibly relieved. He wiped blood off his hands with a white towel. He announced to the waiting room that the little terrier had survived the emergency surgery and was currently resting on oxygen. He then noticed the police officers and the tense standoff in his lobby. Nolan pointed to the yellow scanner in Sarah's hand. "Doctor, I need you to scan that Malinois. Please scan the exact spot behind the left ear where my dog is sitting." Marcus panicked violently. His fake victim persona evaporated in a single second. Pure, unhinged desperation took over his face. He lunged forward to grab the nylon leash, desperate to pull the dog away from Ranger and the veterinarian. "Do not touch my dog," Marcus yelled, his voice echoing loudly. "He is a classified military asset. His medical records are highly restricted. You do not have federal clearance to run a scan on him. I am leaving right now." Officer Davis stepped directly into Marcus's path. The tall officer placed a firm, immovable hand squarely on Marcus's chest, physically stopping his forward momentum. "Step back, sir," Officer Davis commanded with absolute authority. "If it is your dog, a simple microchip scan will confirm your ownership. Let the doctor do his job." Marcus froze. Heavy drops of sweat poured down his forehead. He looked frantically at the heavy glass door, clearly calculating an escape route. Officer Miller moved silently, placing his hand near his utility belt and completely blocking the only exit. Dr. Aris took the yellow scanner from Sarah. He walked over to the terrified Malinois. Ranger remained perfectly seated, acting as a calm, solid anchor for the frightened animal. Dr. Aris knelt on the cold floor. He pressed the flat end of the scanner right behind the Malinois' left ear, exactly where Ranger had nudged. He pressed the blue activation button. A loud, sharp beep echoed through the silent veterinary clinic. The digital screen on the scanner lit up brightly, displaying a long 15-digit identification number. Dr. Aris read the number out loud clearly. Sarah typed the digits rapidly into the National Pet Registry database on her desktop computer. Everyone in the room stopped breathing. The office printer hummed quietly. The keyboard clicked rapidly under Sarah's fingers. A small loading circle spun on the monitor. Sarah let out a sharp gasp. She stared at the computer screen, her eyes wide. She then looked up at Marcus with an expression of absolute, unadulterated disgust. "The dog is registered," Sarah announced, her voice shaking slightly with raw anger. "But his name is not Weapon. His name is not Soldier. His name is Duke." Nolan crossed his arms over his broad chest. "Who is the registered owner, Sarah?" Sarah turned the computer monitor outward, so the police officers could clearly see the bright screen. "The legal owner is listed as Corporal David Vance. He lives in the neighboring town. There is a massive red flag on this digital file. Duke was reported stolen from a fenced residential backyard exactly 4 weeks ago." Sarah read the next line on the screen, and tears immediately welled in her eyes. "Duke is not a tactical combat dog. He is a registered psychiatric service animal. Corporal Vance is a severely disabled combat veteran who uses a wheelchair. Duke is his prescribed medical lifeline." The brutal revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. The atmosphere in the clinic shifted instantly from annoyance to pure, concentrated hatred. Marcus did not just buy fake military patches to look tough at the grocery store. He did not just lie about classified overseas deployments to boost his fragile ego. He stole a highly trained service dog from a real crippled hero. He took a vital, living companion away from a man who had actually sacrificed his physical body for the country. Marcus starved the dog, abused it with a cruel metal choke collar, and paraded it around town to collect fake charity donations for his own pockets. Marcus looked down at the linoleum floor. He had absolutely nothing left to say. His elaborate lies had trapped him in a heavy iron cage of his own making. The plot had unraveled entirely, completely exposing the ugly, greedy thief hiding beneath the pristine camouflage jacket. The silence in the room was no longer just heavy. It was a clear, undeniable demand for immediate justice. Officer Davis did not waste another second listening to Marcus complain. The tall policeman stepped forward and grabbed Marcus tightly by the left bicep. He spun the fraudulent soldier around with practiced force, pushing him face first against the front reception desk. Officer Miller moved in simultaneously, grabbing Marcus's other arm. Metal handcuffs clicked loudly and definitively around the man's thick wrists, locking his hands behind his back. Marcus tried to twist away, completely abandoning his fake military stoicism. He whined loudly, begging the officers to reconsider, claiming it was all a simple misunderstanding over a stray dog he found on the street. Officer Miller ignored the pathetic excuses. He began reading Marcus his Miranda rights in a loud, clear voice, officially listing the severe charges being brought against him. They arrested Marcus for grand theft, impersonating a federal officer, committing charity fraud, and endangering the life of a registered medical service animal. The heavy glass front doors swung open wide. The two officers marched the humiliated bully out of the clinic and shoved him into the back seat of their flashing patrol cruiser. The moment the police car drove out of the parking lot, the tense atmosphere inside the waiting room shattered. The clinic erupted into spontaneous applause. Customers clapped their hands loudly. Sarah cheered from behind the wooden counter. Even the young man holding the golden retriever let out a loud whistle of approval. Every single person directed their gratitude toward the quiet corner where Nolan stood. Nolan did not smile proudly. He did not puff out his chest or raise his hands to acknowledge the praise. He simply gave a short, respectful nod to the crowd. He sat back down in his plastic chair, picked up his worn paperback book, and commanded Ranger to resume his strict resting position. Nolan had no desire to be the center of attention. He just wanted to finish his errand. 3 hours passed. The frantic morning rush slowly faded into a quiet, manageable afternoon. The clinic staff cleaned the floors and reorganized the lobby. Most of the original customers finished their appointments and went home. Nolan and Ranger remained patiently in their corner, waiting for Dr. Aris to become available for the routine checkup. Finally, a specialized transport van pulled up to the front curb. The side doors opened. A police officer stepped out and unfolded a metal ramp. He assisted a man rolling a manual wheelchair down onto the sidewalk. Corporal David Vance pushed himself through the heavy glass doors of the clinic. Vance was a man in his late 40s with thick graying hair and deep lines etched deeply into his weathered face. He wore a faded olive green jacket and blue jeans. He had a prosthetic left leg resting on the footplate of his chair. He looked physically exhausted, carrying the heavy, visible weight of a man who had lost his most vital companion. Sarah immediately stepped out from behind the reception desk to greet the veteran. Dr. Aris emerged from the back hallway leading a dog on a soft fabric leash. They had removed the heavy tactical vest and the cruel metal choke chain. Duke looked entirely different without the restrictive gear. The moment the Malinois stepped into the lobby, his ears swiveled sharply forward. He locked his eyes on the man in the wheelchair. Duke recognized the scent of his true handler instantly. The dog let out a sharp, joyful bark that echoed off the tile walls. He hit the end of the leash, scrambling across the slippery floor with pure, desperate excitement. Dr. Aris unclipped the leash and let the dog go. Duke sprinted directly to the wheelchair. He threw his front paws up onto Vance's lap and buried his fawn-colored head deeply into the veteran's chest. Vance dropped his hands from the wheels. He wrapped his thick arms around the dog, burying his face in the soft fur. The hardened combat veteran sobbed openly in the middle of the clinic, completely unashamed of his tears. Duke licked the salt off Vance's cheeks, whining with absolute happiness. His tail wagged so hard his entire back half shook. After a long minute of intense reunion, Duke dropped all four paws back onto the floor. He immediately assumed his highly trained working position right beside the left wheel of the chair. He leaned his warm body weight heavily against Vance's leg, automatically providing the deep pressure therapy the veteran required to stay calm. The broken, terrified prisoner from the morning was completely gone. The loyal, disciplined guardian had finally returned home. Every person watching the reunion wiped tears from their eyes. "Doctor?" Aris cleared his throat, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. He addressed the small group remaining in the lobby. He announced that the tiny Jack Russell Terrier had fully stabilized. The little dog survived the complex emergency surgery and was currently resting comfortably inside an oxygen chamber. The clinic breathed a collective sigh of immense relief. 2 lives had been saved that day. Nolan closed his paperback book. He stood up and walked over to the wooden reception desk. Ranger healed perfectly at his left side, moving in silent unison with his handler. Nolan pulled a worn leather wallet from his back pocket. He looked at Sarah and asked for the total cost of Ranger's routine vaccination and physical examination. Dr. Aris stepped behind the counter. He placed his hand firmly over the credit card machine. The tall veterinarian shook his head, looking Nolan directly in the eye. Dr. Aris refused to charge Nolan a single cent for the visit. He thanked Nolan sincerely for protecting his staff, exposing a dangerous criminal, and reuniting a crippled hero with his medical dog. Dr. Aris stated the clinic owed Nolan a profound debt they could never measure in dollars. Nolan tried to hand his credit card to Sarah, but Dr. Aris held his ground, completely refusing to process the payment. Nolan respected the man's firm, honorable stance. He nodded slowly and put his wallet away. However, Nolan did not leave his debts unpaid. He looked down the counter and noticed a clear acrylic donation box resting near the edge. A small paper sign, taped to the front of the plastic box, read, "Emergency Surgical Fund." Nolan reached into his front pocket. He pulled out a thick, folded stack of cash. He did not count the money. He did not ask how much the surgery cost. He simply shoved the entire stack of $50 and $100 bills directly through the narrow slot at the top of the box. He looked at Sarah and instructed her to apply those funds directly to the Jack Russell Terrier's medical bill. Sarah gasped loudly at the sheer amount of money filling the bottom of the box. She tried to thank him, but Nolan did not wait for her praise. He turned away from the desk. He looked down at Ranger. He gave a tiny upward flick of his fingers. Ranger stood up instantly. The man and the dog walked toward the exit together. They did not look back at the cheering staff or the crying veteran holding his dog. Nolan pushed open the heavy glass doors. He and Ranger stepped out into the bright, peaceful afternoon sun, leaving all the noise and chaos entirely behind them. In a world that often rewards the loudest voice in the room, Nolan and Ranger remind us of a profound truth. Real strength does not need to shout to be heard. True honor is not found in the patches you wear on your jacket or the titles you loudly claim, but in how you choose to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The most arrogant person in the room is often hiding the deepest weakness, while the quietest observer might just be the one holding the line between chaos and safety. As I share this story with you, I truly believe we all have the power to be quiet protectors in our own lives, standing up for truth and fairness, even when it is difficult. If this story of justice and loyalty touched your heart, Please gently share it with someone who needs a reminder that good still exists in this world. Leave a comment below to let me know your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories about the incredible bond between humans and animals. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, quiet strength, and unwavering courage. Please comment Amen below if you believe that true heroes still walk among us every single day.